Are exchanging, right? It's an exchange for bodily autonomy. And I hadn't thought about it that way. And I was like, that makes really good sense that they're at the time in biblical times, or, 3,000 years ago, they were doing child sacrifice in exchange to different deities or things like that. Now they're just doing child sacrifice through means of abortion for bodily autonomy or whatever other reason, whether it be personal gain, financial gain, whatever the case may be.
Well, because they're worshiping human autonomy and human reason as the highest ideal rather than the mind of God.
It's about what you value. Like, they're valuing their bodily autonomy over the life of the unborn baby. But what would God value more? God would value the life of the preborn baby more than their bodily autonomy. So they're putting something in a value above God, what God wants.
Yeah, that's one. And I wasn't like, I couldn't find a way to point it out. I do. One thing that I do like to go into that I've been trying to talk about is like the problem of like, and I think me and Kanoa have been kind of going into the problem of infinite regress and how like God is the only way to get out of like epistemic circularity, right? Like there's no, if you're appealing to something, whether it be yourself or something else, I try to show them through like infinite regress that like they can't ultimately say why it would be wrong or be able to make any moral predications. And the only reason that they can do this is because God has written his law into our hearts. But for them to, like Darth says, is to speak intelligibly about anything that they say, God is necessary to be able to ground any moral predications that they're making.
Darth is going into the metaphysics behind language itself. So even like talking assumes certain like metaphysical things, but like people don't understand metaphysics. So I think that's like I totally agree. Like Darth's approach is like the best and all that, but it's just
I like yours too.
I'm not asking him to memorize my words.
Right.
I'm trying to pass on to him, like a professor would, these metaphysical concepts, and then he can break it down in his own words into everyday language.
I got you.
And I've tried to, I have probably 50 recordings of you, Precept, 50 plus of Darth that I just study and I make notes, and I take it seriously because
it takes time. It took me a long time to learn this. It takes time. Like
Darth, can you actually explain something to me that Greg Bonson was talking about that was kind of hard for me to understand, but I was trying to track is it called monism?
Yes.
Monism.
Monism, that just means
Mm-hmm.
there's just a world. It's just one thing.
Because I have actually a bunch of Sikhs that are trying to get onto my live, and people that are like Hindu and Sikhs that they're pro-life, but they also are aware now that I'm a Protestant Christian and they don't like what I'm saying because it's not leading to be other people becoming
Okay, so
Hindus.
in the Christian worldview,
Yeah.
we have the creator-creature distinction. There's God,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is His creation. So we have twoism. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have oneism. We have twoism. The creator-creature distinction. Monism comes from the word mono, means one.
One, yeah.
It means there's just one thing that represents the world. Now, that one thing can be a set containing particulars, but it's still one thing rather than there's a demarcation between the creator and the creation. There's a book on that. Hold on a second, give me the title.
Yeah. And I think he was just talking about how, he was kind of going in on a lecture about how to ultimately kind of crush all these other faiths and prove that Christianity, the true and God of the Christian Bible, is the only God. That monism, if you understand monism, that you can defeat a bunch of these other, religions, because they're similar in the sense that they're like, say they believe that everything is one, or I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but I'm trying to kind of get it out.
Yeah, monism would lead to knowledge being impossible.
Mm-hmm.
We need a Trinitarian ultimate.
Because it's circular.
Okay, so if you go, so in your thumb drives with the books.
Yeah.
If you go to the apologetics and Christian philosophy folder,
Okay.
there's a myriad of books in there. In that folder, there's a folder called Peter Jones.
Okay, I saw that one in there. Yep.
Okay, so he has several books that are dealing with the same theme. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He has one book. It's called One or Two.
Okay, one or
two. And the subtitle is Romans 1 for the 21st Century. Okay.
Yeah.
And he's basically talking about the antithesis, as Van Til would put it, between the creator-creature distinction versus oneism, as Peter Jones would put it. Okay.
I see it. Yep, right here.
So they think that the world is just one. Okay, and that there is not a distinct and discrete realm that has precedence over the world, namely the mind of God. So if you might want to read that book One or Two. Okay.
Don't they don't they just fall into the same bucket as atheists though, because they have no external reference point to?
Yes, absolutely. Well, atheism is basically monism as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm thinking,
other than some counterfeits of God, okay, that may pay lip service to the creator-creature distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the creator-creature distinction, all you have is every world religion would be following some aspect of monism. Yeah. But if you read that book, One or Two, that will help you understand what Bonson is talking about when he talks about monism.
Yeah, it was kind of a brief lecture I found on YouTube about it, and
definitely procure that book out of the Peter R. Jones folder and the apologetics folder, and that will
a world of difference. One of two.
It's called One or Two. It's in the Peter R. Jones folder.
Okay, it's One or Two describes oneism and twoism, the two ways of being spiritual.
Twoism would be the creator-creature distinction. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, he subtitles the book Romans 1 for the first century.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, P. Mars, thank you for the paper. I'm going to definitely read that. And like I said, if there's any critiques that you have that I can do better, obviously, because I want to represent the argument to the best of my ability.
You're doing a good job,
I
man.
do take it with seriousness.
Yeah, you're doing a good job, and I like that you're defending people who can't defend themselves. So I think that's really admirable.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't try to take any of the glory for it. It's just to glorify God and what He wants, and obviously,
Have you got okay? So, in the Bonson folder
Mhm.
is another folder called the Objective Proof for Christianity.
Yeah,
You need to read and study that book.
is that one by Joshua Pillows?
Well, he's
Yeah.
the editor.
He's the editor. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I had a bunch that you read, and then I've been ordering a couple of them, and then I'm glad that you gave me that folder because I mean, obviously, that's just like that's the honey hole of like information. So,
Yeah, yeah. In,
I just-
in that folder is my highlighted version.
mhm. Oh, is that okay?
Yeah. If you want to see what sentences I highlighted.
Yeah. If you guys, like I said, if you guys ever want to come up, it's been crazy how much we've been having conversations with I mean, it's like so many atheists are coming up and they're pro-choice and they want to talk about AB, right? But why would I don't mean this in a rude way, but why do I want to sit there and listen? And I don't say this mean or anything, but they ultimately can't justify anything that they say. So
I heard you talking to someone tonight, and I thought about coming up, but then I was like, I kind of want you to like get some practice. Like it's good for you to practice.
Because they're enamored with their false belief that they are in possession of autonomous reasoning. This stems from several hundred years ago from something called the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
The Enlightenment was the abandonment of a biblical worldview and the exaltation of pure human reason, okay, and giving God the double middle fingers. So you have to understand that the way people think, that there's a historical precedence for this. Okay, people just didn't happen to start to think these ways by their own choice. Okay, this is a historical development that took several centuries. Okay.
Yeah, I just am. It's just kind of it's. I don't want to get frustrated with them. That's the thing that I'm trying not to do. Is because I don't want to, because I want them to know that I do love them because Christ has commanded me to love them. I don't agree with their worldview and their position, but I notice how they want to keep going back to the topic of AB instead of actually grounding.
Well, can I say something that helps me with frustration? Is obviously praying for those who persecute you is great, but
Absolutely.
I think about how like patient God has been with us. Right? God has been so patient with us, patient with Israel. Like we should be patient like God's patient.
Yeah, at church today, actually, my pastor.
Let me just say this before I forget. In the Bonson folder, there's a folder called the Trilogy. In there's a trilogy of short books, 3 of them, written by Bonson as well. You should read those as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
One is called Pushing the Antithesis. One is called The Impossibility of the Contrary. And the other one is called Against All Opposition. Now, there's a volume 1, 2, and 3. I don't know what the order is, but definitely study The Objective Proof for Christianity and read those books as well. And it will teach you how to push the antithesis, because whenever they assert what is or cannot be, apart from God's world and God's plan, they're just invoking a figment of their imagination.
Yeah. That couldn't be more true. Yeah, I agree. I thank you guys for the information. And yeah, like I said, P. Mars, I like that you have ways of just staying calm. Today in church, we were reading through Ephesians and how to deal with like anger is that I'm not responding to anger the way that I used to. And it's hard to not have these reactions to people that are so evasive.
The more effective you become, the more they're going to try to antagonize you.
Absolutely. That's it. When they know that, like you say, is like they're not dealing with low-hanging fruit, then they start to waffle, deflect, be evasive, because they know that they can't actually ground their worldview. So instead of doing so, they just don't. They just start saying a bunch of stuff.
They're like 9 out of 10 of these people are not interested in what you have to say. So keep that in mind too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Most of them are village idiots and trolls.
Yeah.
What's going on tonight?
Thank you guys.
Go ahead, Trance. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Trance was next. He's been waiting. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks, buddy.
No.
God bless.
God bless, man.
I was just curious how abortion is child sacrifice.
Well, because God says it is.
Because God
is
says
God.
it is?
Yeah, because God is our authority.
Where does he say that it's sacrifice, child sacrifice?
In the Bible, it says we're not to murder. And they're sacrificing the life of the child to the God of human autonomy and the God of convenience.
But God supports abortion. What about the bitter water?
Okay, well, first of all, in that passage in the Old Testament, it's not talking about creating or implementing a miscarriage. In fact, the Hebrew is not entirely clear. It can be understood to produce a woman who will be then barren rather than abortion. So you're just cherry picking one of many verses that atheists pick on.
The atheist script. Is there some website that trains you guys to repeat this crap? Like
it makes you look silly when you quote these cherry picking verses. Number two, it's God's prerogative to end human life anytime he sees fit. It is not our prerogative to indiscriminately take life, whether it's the young or the old. So when you say God committed abortions, it's just simply, well, first of all, abortion is a surgical.
You're against the death penalty?
Right? No.
But you just said that we shouldn't be the ones taking life, and we should leave it to God.
No, did you? Obviously, you're not listening very carefully. I said it is not our prerogative before God to indiscriminately take life. The death penalty is not an indiscriminate taking life. And in fact, the death penalty is sanctioned both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament.
Well, we would say that God would use the human justice.
How is the death penalty compatible with turning the other cheek?
Because
in the Old Testament, for non-capital offenses, if somebody insulted you or offended you, Jesus said to turn the other cheek in our day-to-day interactions with people. Okay? That's
not how I would interpret that.
The death penalty has to do with violating certain social guidelines that God has implemented both in the Old and New Testament, which would be considered to be capital crimes.
So you support all of the capital punishment?
I support capital punishment. In the days of the Revolutionary War, if you stole somebody's horse, okay, which was their livelihood, right? You could be executed. It's a capital crime. Today, horses are for leisure and for fun. They're not for maintaining people's livelihoods. Okay. So the bottom line is this: the Bible, God sanctions. He said, "For whosoever takes man's blood, by his blood it shall be spilled." So God, in the Bible, sanctions the death penalty.
Well, he sanctions it for also sexual immorality. Do you support that too?
Well, the penalty for that had to do with God's covenant relationship with Israel. Whether or not a society wants to permit that and emulate the laws that God gave to Israel would be up to any particular society. I think that our society would be way better off. We wouldn't have the vast destruction of inner cities. We wouldn't have all of the unborn babies that are being killed in abortion if we had more stringent laws. The bottom line is this. Whatever the Bible, see, what you're doing is you're thinking that all of the Old Testament laws that God gave to Israel, that they're universally binding upon all people on the planet. And that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that there are certain inherent principles that reflect God's general purpose in creation that are reflected in Old Testament law that are binding upon all people. But not all of the statutes are universally binding in terms of like civil law. Okay?
Got it. So you want to kill people for having sex out of marriage. Got it.
That's not what I said. And right now you're being completely disingenuous and deceitful when you say that, which means that you're not a trustworthy person to talk to.
Yeah, I kicked him.
And he left. Okay, so
No,
he was being a
can you hear
scumbag.
me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I kicked him. I kicked him when he said that.
yeah.
So
He's trying to bait you into saying something horrible, but that's
no, we
not-
can't. We can't say these words on TikTok. So
Oh yeah. I'll be very careful with my wording. So if I have
yes,
to
yeah,
be
you have to-
slow. I was
So in the
looking-
world, let me just say this: in the world today, because of the violation of God's general principles in creation, one man for one woman, we have an unimaginable amount of sexually transmitted diseases, and even people dying in early death because they contracted diseases. Do you know how many women in years gone past have died of various types of cancer because they contracted sexually transmitted diseases that they didn't even know they have? Hey, have you ever heard of chlamydia? Right? So God's laws for Israel, if they were followed in principle, would mean that there would be people getting these sexually transmitted diseases or genetic diseases. But these people, they think they know everything.
Darth, I had heard a different interpretation on that. I think that turn the other cheek gets grossly misinterpreted as to like be patient with crap from people or something.
No, it meant not to retaliate.
No, I heard an interpretation where, well, I would say not to retaliate with violence, I would say, because so it has to do with like in Israel, right, there was like
you could respond. You could criticize them for slapping.
well, okay, well, here's what this I read an exegesis that I thought was really interesting. So it has to do with like in Israel, their customs, right? They had the like one hand was for unclean tasks and one hand was for clean tasks thing, right? And also there was a custom when like you slap someone who's like a lesser status than you give them a backhand slap. To slap them with the forehand would be like how you would slap an equal. And because they can only slap with one hand, because of the right hand, left hand, clean, unclean thing, they can only hit their.
I think that you're barking up a wrong tree.
Am I really?
Yeah. It's just simple. It just simply means that when somebody delivers you a socially, how shall I put it? Somebody delivers to you something that's socially disgracing. Or an insult, that you're not to physically retaliate.
Well,
That doesn't mean you can't respond verbally.
he was saying like because they could only do a backhand slap to a slave, and so if you turn the other cheek, then your master.
No, it's talking about
slap
if they slap you as opposed to somebody physically assaulting you. Okay, if they slap you, this is intended as an insult. So
Yeah,
when
yeah.
Jesus says turn the other cheek, what he is saying is you don't slap them back physically.
Right, but you
So
also like
turning
stand, it's also he's standing up for himself and he's showing that he's the equal, because by turning the cheek, if you were to slap him again, you would have to slap him as you would slap an equal with like the forehand.
We have to be careful that we don't read more into certain things Jesus said than is readily available in the text. I perfectly agree with you that there are certain cultural and historical factors that are pertinent to many things.
Right.
But it's just very simple that they slap you as a matter of insult.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Look,
All right.
let me give you an example. Paul certainly was one of the greatest believers. When the high priest said something to him, Paul didn't know it was a high priest, and he told him that he was a whitewashed tomb. Right? The priest was very insulting to Paul, and Paul, you're a whitewashed tomb. Right? So turning the other cheek simply meant that you didn't retaliate in kind, meaning the physical slap.
One quick story and then I'm done. So I'm a baby. I consider myself a baby Christian. I became a Christian like 5 years ago only. And when I was early in just becoming a Christian, I was going on Praise I Ams, and him and Gavin pissed me off so badly one time. I moved.
Praise is an immature person.
He is. They pissed me off so much that I mooned them on my camera. And when they all told me and they all told me, that's not very Christian of you, P. Mars. I go, well, Jesus said to turn the other cheek.
Okay, well, that's funny. Well, you know something? Praise has repeatedly gone after people that he has a variety of disagreements with, and he's been utterly obscene and vulgar to a wide array of people, including myself. I mean, look, we all, like, from time to time, like, for example, if I get angry at somebody, I might drop an F-bomb, which I shouldn't do. But praise routinely, as a matter of practice, when he disagrees with debate content with people, even if I were to agree with him that some of the people that he's disputed, where he's right and they're wrong, he has done caricatures and spoken of them in utterly vulgar and obscene ways. Myself,
very immature,
included.
like fart
Okay,
noise.
this is ghastly behavior on the part of praise.
It's actually
Praise is not stupid.
I guess you're right. Like, he's more immature than what I did by mooning him. That guy is like way more.
He is. Well, look. It's not that he's stupid, but he's an extremely immature person, and he remains this one today. He has backstabbed me. I can't tell you how many times. Anyway, welcome, Meeps. What would you like to say?
I think Dale was waiting. Dale.
Well, I thought Dale was done. Dale, do you want to say anything else?
I didn't want to get in the way of any other people's
Okay, well,
questions.
we can go to Meeps first, I guess.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I can't hear you.
Go ahead,
Thanks.
Meeps.
I just wanted to talk because I don't believe in the 1, 2, and 5. Like, science is a theistic concept. Because the idea of science is more like applying the scientific method. And where has the scientific method been applied to proving God?
So let me ask you this question, okay? We have two models of reality. We have the God world and the not God world, okay? In the God world, God functions as the single causal first principle. The mind and plan of God actualizes what the world is in that model of reality. Okay, do you understand that so far? Okay. So in the not God world, God is excluded. So there is no identifiable single causal first principle that actualizes everything. Okay. So when you talk about doing science, you're going to have to presuppose a number of fundamental parameters, right? So in the God world, it's the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God who actualizes the regularity of nature. He constructs a world that is rational. He makes the world rationally apprehensible. and he endows man with the capacity of logic and reason. And through studying the world that God has made, we can understand, or at least come up with explanations of things that are not immediately apparent to us in the God world. In the not God world, when you apply the scientific method, you're adopting the notion that you are a rational being, that the world somehow provides you with rational faculties, and that you can have access to a rational world, and that the world operates in certain regular ways, meaning that there's a regularity of nature. So in a not God world, what is it that actualizes the regularity of nature as a precondition for science?
Well, give me a second. I need to see something.
Yeah. Since you reject that God is the self-revealing God in creation and human history through Jesus Christ, then you're adopting that there's something else that is actualizing the regularity or uniformity of nature. So what is the something else? Okay? Because the uniformity of nature would have to be true in order to begin to defend the scientific method in a world without God. So what is the something else that actualizes the regularity of nature?
Well, we can just look at other things we find in nature.
That's not
And
an answer to
we
my
can
question. Sir, I'll repeat the question that you didn't answer. Since you reject that God, the mind and plan of God, actualizes the regularity of nature, you believe that there's something else that actualizes the regularity of nature, correct?
Apart from, there's not exact regulation of nature as well.
Sir,
But
you
apart
are
from that,
dodging my question. Do you believe that something else actualizes the regularity of nature?
yeah, that's other things we find in nature. That's what I've been trying to say.
No, sir. Is there something that actualizes the regularity of nature? Yes or no?
I mean,
This is an entirely legitimate question. You're claiming that you can do science rationally without reference to a single causal first principle, namely the mind and plan of the self-revealing God. So you believe that something else actualizes the uniformity of nature, right? You told me yes. Now, what is the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? You see, you just want to take the uniformity for nature just granted. It just is. Well, based upon what?
what uniformity is this, though? There is no, like, exacts in this world.
Look, let me explain something to you, okay? Every scientist that goes into the laboratory or does scientific investigations, including a toddler who goes into the bathroom and then flushes the toilet, okay? Every human being, unless you're brain damaged, right, operates under the principle that nature operates in certain regular ways amongst some irregularities. Okay? Now, either the regularity of nature is true and actualized by virtue of the mind and plan of God, or something else. You're telling me that you can do science which depends upon the uniformity of nature. Good. I'm just asking you, what's the something else that actualizes the realness of the uniformity of nature so that you can do science?
Just personal, like, experiences, you know?
That's not an answer
That doesn't
to my
have to be an
question. That's begging the question. In order to have personal experiences, the uniformity of nature would have to be true. I'm asking you, Is there something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? Yes or no?
The uniformity of nature.
Yeah, if you dodge the question one more time, we're going to be done. Is there something else other than the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God that actualizes the uniformity of nature?
I mean, you should kick me out at this point. I've tried to give you answers, but like,
No, your
Is it the only answer you want is-
okay. Listen. Your answers were not specific or germane to my questions. They're the kind of things that you will say because you don't want to admit that you don't have an explanation for the realness of the uniformity of nature. That's why we're explaining to you that science is ultimately a Christian theistic product, because the mind, the purpose of and the plan of God is God actualizing the world, and the world operates in terms of the regularity of nature that is imposed and actualized by the mind, the purpose, and plan of God. You think you have no need of God. Okay, good. I'm going to take you at your word. What is the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? That'll be the last time I'm going to ask you the question. Because if you don't answer the question, you have no grounds to object to point number 5. Does science depend upon the uniformity of nature? Yes, it does. Is the
what does that
uniformity of
even
nature
mean? The uniformity.
the uniformity
It's
of
not a
nature?
uniform
Okay.
world.
Okay, all right. Listen, young man, you don't know what you're talking about. You're frustrated in this point because you've been outmaneuvered here. Your materialism is failing at this point. You think that you can defend science in a not God world. I'm proving to you right now you're not defending science, because science depends upon a number of foundational parameters, including which is the uniformity of nature.
Can I explain that real quick?
Yes.
So the uniform of nature, the idea that when you touch a hot stove, it burns your hand. You believe in the future because nature is uniform. When you touch a hot stove, it'll burn your hand. That's the uniformity of nature. When the future and the past.
Future will,
Not if you have water on your hand.
Oh, not if you have water.
what you're doing is a form of special pleading. You're changing the parameters. Okay? Now, notice once again, you believe you can do science without acknowledging the self-revealing God who is behind the creation in the world. Okay, fine. I'm going to take your word for it. What is it that actualizes the uniformity of nature?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by the uniformity of nature. I'll just leave at this point. I don't understand what that uniformity of
there are
nature
certain
means.
things in the world that are regular and will be regular like they were in the past. Science depends upon the uniformity of nature.
That there's order in the world, that there's consistency in the world. How do you not get this?
Okay.
Like things aren't chaos. Like nothing's random, right? Like when you drop a pencil, it doesn't randomly go into the sky because nature's uniform. If nature wasn't uniform, things would just be random all the time. You drop the pencil, it would maybe just hover in the air.
What I'm showing to you is this, okay? That in a Christian theistic model, where we accept that God has rationally revealed himself through creation and rationally revealed himself through the prophets and ultimately in Jesus Christ codified in the Bible, God has made it very clear that he is the single causal first principle that actualizes everything according to his plan. When you feel that you can speak intelligibly about your world and even defend science as a legitimate endeavor without reference to God, I'm taking your word for that. And I'm asking you, good, you reject that God actualizes the uniformity of nature. Okay, what's the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? And you're frustrated because you know you can't answer it. So therefore, you cannot claim to rationally defend science in a not God world, because there's nothing within your model of reality that is identifiable and defensible that imposes and sustains the uniformity of nature that you take for granted.
So if we reject the Christian God, then we can't do science because we live in a world of chaos.
You see, whether you agree with us or not is not the point. We are being consistent within our model of reality that the mind, the purpose, and the plan of the self-revealing God of Christianity is the ultimate and singular precondition and prerequisite for everything, including the uniformity of nature. So if the uniformity of nature cannot be rationally accounted for apart from God imposing it and sustaining it according to his plan, then you can't claim to have a rational basis for science, because science depends upon the uniformity of nature.
But there's no reason to believe that that would be God. There would be, there'd be no understanding there.
When you say there's no reason to believe that, what you're doing is you're making a counterclaim that the world is not emblematic and entails ultimate design and intentionality. Okay? What you're now claiming then is, what you're claiming is first and foremost the rejection that the world indicates dependence and derivation from God, and rather what you're advocating is that the world is emblematic of independence from God. Either the world is emblematic of dependence upon God, or the world is emblematic of independence of God. When you say there's not a reason to believe that, are you in a default position of the world is independent of God?
Oh, yes.
Good.
I don't believe it.
What's the reason for that?
Because I haven't seen any proof. I've seen reasons that would...
What you have just committed here is what is called an appeal to ignorance fallacy. An appeal to ignorance fallacy is that a proposition is to be considered to be true because it hasn't been falsified. Your position is that the world is to be reckoned to be independent of God solely on the grounds that it hasn't been falsified by somebody showing to you that the world depends upon God. That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. Now, the only way that you can escape the appeal to ignorance fallacy is to give me a rational justification of how you determine that the world is independent of God. Do you have a reason for that?
Yeah, because there isn't like a reason that there wouldn't be.
Look, you're repeating an appeal to ignorance fallacy. That the world is to be reckoned to be independent of God because it's not falsified. Okay? That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. Are we clear? What if I said to you, would you accept the following? I accept that the world depends upon God because I don't have a reason to believe it's independent of God. Would you accept that line of reasoning?
Sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah. If I said to you, the world depends and derives upon God solely because I don't have a reason to believe that the world is independent of God, is that a valid form of reasoning? You see, what you're doing here...
Not quite, but you're posing the question as if God is an absolute.
Sir, this is what, when unbelievers like yourself get confronted, you're ignoring the question. Would you accept my reasoning that the world is to be reckoned to be dependent upon God because I don't have a reason to believe it's independent of God? Is that valid? Or sound? Because if you say no, you're going to indict your own reasoning.
But that's...
What you are doing right now, the reason why you're having trouble is because what you're doing is what the philosophical paper Atheological Apologetics talks about. You are smuggling in God denialism, but without defending it, but reckoning it to be a default position for which does not require a justification. My line of questioning to you is exposing the fact that you're smuggling in a God-independent world and reckoning it to be default without arguing for it. I gave you a rationale for how the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality. You don't accept that. Do you have a rationale that the world is emblematic of independence from God without saying, yeah, because I don't have a reason to believe the contrary? That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy.
Well, I don't have the Bible with me right now, so I can't look at verses, but
It's not going to help.
think
Dude,
that the idea that
it's not going to help you. I have 14 years of experience debating atheists.
the unity of, what was it?
So
The
the point
unity
is
of creation.
Science is a theistic concept because what undergirds science are a number of foundational parameters, one of which is the uniformity of nature. Either science will be undergirded by the fact that the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality, and because the world does reflect and reveal God by his purpose, God being the absolute, he creates and secures the uniformity of nature. Well, if you reject that, you have some explaining to do.
So you thought you're shocked, aren't you? You've been caught with your pants down because you came in here didn't think we had any way to defend what we're saying. But the opposite is true, right?
You see, one thing that unbelievers do all the time is they think that not accepting an opposing point of view is a rebuttal. It's not. Not accepting it is an implicit counterclaim. But that implicit counterclaim is going to have to be unpacked and defended.
But then, with biology, what is the idea that it's always going to stay the same? Because when you said you would retract your hand...
Hold on a second. I don't understand your first statement.
Yeah, I think he's saying that we're not saying it always stays the same. We're saying in the future.
That's not what we're saying. No, what we're saying is... No, we're not saying that the uniformity of nature does not mean that nothing changes.
But what you just said is something true and related it to God.
I'm trying to explain to you. The uniformity of nature doesn't mean that nothing will change. It means that there are certain aspects that are regular alongside that there are irregularities. It's called the principle of continuity and principle of discontinuity. There's continuity for certain things and there's discontinuity for others. There's regularity for some things and irregularity for others. Okay?
But in what way does that have God being the reason for it? Because what you've just said is that, something very obvious that everyone knows, and then you just said that's because of God.
I explained to you that the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality by God's purpose. Therefore, the world is a revelatory environment by God's purpose to us. Now, if you don't accept that scenario, you will instantaneously be making a worldview counterclaim that the world is not emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality. Okay, so then what you're saying is that the regularity of nature is real and actualized by something else and not God. Okay, I'm holding you to your position because you don't have the privilege or the prerogative of expressing neutrality. There's no neutrality here. Either the world and the uniformity of the nature is God dependent and God derived and emblematic of God or not. if you then stake out the position that it is not, you're going to have to explain your position. You don't have the luxury of sitting on some alleged default position of a world independent of God until shown otherwise, because that's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. But you see, unbelievers and atheists have been doing this for hundreds of years. They're smuggling in God denialism without arguing for it. Claiming
But
you're
you just said that it was.
Look, let me explain something to you. When you do not accept that God is the self-revealing God through creation, you're not simply in a state of incredulity where you're just an innocent bystander, where golly shucks, you're unconvinced and you're in some default position. The Christian theistic position of the self-revealing God is not a novel introduction or overlay upon an already default position. Okay? Because that's the way unbelievers would like it to be, or the way that they'd like to think of it. You see, what we have is a clash of worldviews. We have a conflict of systems. Either the world is God-dependent, God-derived, or the world is not God-dependent or God-derived. Okay? Now, if you're going to reject the reasoning or the rationale for a God-derived and God-dependent world, in that the world exemplifies ultimate design and intentionality by God's purpose, then you're going to be staking out the counterposition that the world is God independent. Okay, good. Then you're going to have to explain yourself. Isn't that fair?
Yes, but I've been saying that.
Good. Then explain your world. Why do you have an expectation that the future will be like the past? Is there something within your overall system that is absolute and invariant, that secures that some things will be regular tomorrow like they were yesterday? Is there something that imposes that?
But I don't think that's any reason to believe in.
You're not
God, because
focusing on my question. What you're doing is you're ignoring what I'm presenting to you because you don't have an answer.
Because maybe an answer is more than 4 words, and I have to get around to that.
Sir, you have yet to explain what is the something else that actualizes the persistence or the perpetuity of the regularity of nature. Is there something that secures that other than you?
And what if I say no?
Well, then you have no basis for science, because if there's not something that is in and of itself invariant and absolute that actualizes and sustains the regularity of nature, then you have now destroyed science. Science requires, as one of several fundamental parameters, that the uniformity of nature be true. So I just tried to ask you, for point number 5, I showed you why science is a Christian theistic concept, right? And your position is it's not a Christian theistic concept. Well, I took you on your word. So explain to me what it is that ultimately undergirds the uniformity of nature in order to say science doesn't depend upon God. And you have nothing.
Because your idea is that there has to be something there.
Because don't you understand?
Because the way that we know that things happen is that we look from other things and take inference on how that affects other things.
This is going over your head. So we're going to have to go over it again. You, in your model of reality, if things are going to repeat, things are not going to repeat because it's a part of God's plan. So why are things going to repeat?
Well, what if we don't know? And you're going to say ignorance fallacy. But sometimes it's okay to not know.
Okay, young man, I just showed you that you cannot defend the viability of science in a not God world.
If you don't know,
demonstrated it to you.
If you don't know, the entailment is that 5 is true. If your answer is I don't know, then 5 is true. So you lost the debate.
I just made listen to me. I just gave a rational case for 0.5. You
The
do
rational
not
case is that
accept,
there's-
let me finish. I made a rational defense of 0.5. You do not accept that my rational defense of 0.5 is valid and sound. But when you do not accept that, you're making a counterclaim. Do you realize that? And I want you to answer that question. When you do not accept my defense of 0.5 as I have given it, you are making a counterclaim. Are you not?
Yes.
Good. Your counterclaim is that something else actualizes and sustains the uniformity of nature so that we can have science. Right? Is that your position?
Yes, but
Good. What's the something else that actualizes and sustains the uniformity of nature so that science can be viable without reference to the plan of God? What's the something else?
we don't know. No one knows.
Well, guess what? So if you don't know, you're denying God in virtue of I don't know.
Because you said that it's all from intentional
Okay,
design. You can't see any.
You're not. Listen to me. Are you denying that God is the ultimate foundation for science and the uniformity of nature?
What do you consider to be science then? Because it sounds like you're thinking of it as
Sir, notice how many times you have dodged my reasonable question. Are you denying?
That's because I'm trying to narrow down what the question means.
Sir, listen to me. The reason why you're dodging is because answering the question implicates your position as being bankrupt. Are you
It's hard to answer a silly question.
Okay. It's not okay. You're
on some
done.
flawed grounds.
Okay. Goodbye. Yeah.
It's
Goodbye.
on flawed grounds, man.
Okay. Did you see that? Notice, because it was a relevant question, it was a germane question, right? So what they do is they resort to lying. Oh, it's a silly question. No, it's not a silly question. It's not a flawed question to ask you. What in your model is it that undergirds the uniformity of nature?
I think we've just
that's a silly
demonstrated
question.
that was shell shock, pretty much, that whole thing.
Yeah, and what it is people will come out and they will lie. How is me asking him what is it that undergirds the uniformity of nature that's not God? Oh, that's a silly question.
Notice how he basically admits he has no idea how to answer it towards the end. But
so in other words,
wait,
I give
listen.
a rational explication for 0.5, and his rebuttal is, I don't know, did it?
Well, notice at the beginning he tried to answer the question, right? But then at the end he's like basically admitting that he can't answer the question. So if he can't answer the question, like, why was he even trying to answer it? You know? And this is what they do. They know they can't answer the question, but they'll answer the question, even though they know they don't know how to answer the question.
Yeah. So what he wants to do is, and what they want to do is they want to say, there's something that actualizes the uniformity of nature. I don't know what it is, but I do know it's not God. Well, if you don't know what it is, how do you know it's not God?
Yes. Well, tell him there's good news that in most major cities that he might live in, they do offer free psychotherapy for the traumatized.
Well, I mean, he's a nice, like I try to have a little talk with him because I think he's been deceived in a lot of areas, but there's a lot of good stuff he says. But anyway, he wanted me to ask you a question. He said, just because the Bible authors spoke of certainty, we can't have that same exact certainty because God gave them inspiration to write scripture. So why are we expecting
The guy's a theological ignoramus. Either the composite propositional message of the Christian worldview speaks authoritatively or not. The issue is not certitude, but whether or not it is speaking authoritatively. Okay?
A long history of bastardizing its own theology.
Yeah, and I agree. And then he admitted, that he's not well studied on precepts and the arguments and stuff, but he said he's willing to learn. But he says he, for the most part, agrees with the things that are said. But I don't think he understands.
Either he accepts that the Bible compositely speaks authoritatively or not. It doesn't matter that somebody brings in this issue of certitude. Now, certitude is a semi-related issue. The real issue is not certitude. Do you know that they've actually done psychological studies where they took students, and one group of students thought that they were extremely proficient at certain aspects of math, but when they took a test, they did miserably on it. Then there were students, and in fact, I think they were Asian students, who had a dim view at their proficiency, and yet they did extremely well in spite of the fact that they had a lack of certitude in their proficiency. So certitude is not the same thing as authoritativeness. Now, if one concludes you're speaking authoritative, then it follows from that you will have a sense of certitude. But we shouldn't confuse certitude with authoritativeness. Okay?
So you're saying he's conflating being certain of the truth with the authority of it.
He's conflating certitude with being authoritative or speaking authoritatively.
Okay.
Okay. This guy shouldn't look. If this guy is this confused and this uninformed, he has no business doing apologetics.
Bart, do you think we should someone should work hard in trying to convert all of these Christian apologists into becoming presuppositional apologists?
Well, they don't have to give up a lot of their rationale. It just has
have to frame it differently, right, Dart?
It has to be framed in a biblical way. They're just framing evidences and rationales in a probabilistic, abductive manner, and that's not biblical.
Yeah.
You don't have to give up referring to evidences, but evidences can be used, incorporated in exemplifying God's revelation of himself. But that's not, evidentialists almost always are not invoking that we know God through his revelatory acts. They're just talking about God's revelatory acts as though they weren't classified as revelatory acts, but that we can make an abductive inference to the best explanation. Well, when you deliberately exclude the revelational aspect. So, for example, when you hear me talk, I'm constantly saying everything in the world, from the smallest to the grandest scale, exemplifies ultimate design and intentionality and by God's purpose, which means these facts that we say are indicative of God are only indicative of God if and only if God purposed them to be revelatory of himself. Them just being mere facts and then just making an inference to the best explanation does not represent it as being revelatory of God by God.
Yeah. Right.
And for those of you who want to study the issue, you
can on the use of evidence, right?
Van Til and the use of evidence. You can Google that and you can find that out on there. One wonderful human being scanned this very rare book, and they uploaded it to the internet because it's extremely rare, but now it's available.
You know what another issue is, Darth, that gets in the way of people understanding presuppositionalism is they think that it somehow entails Calvinism. And that's a common objection I hear from a lot of people. Oh, that's just Calvinism. You're presupposing a total inability to believe, so God has to regenerate you, and that's where your presupposition. And I'm like, no.
Can you start over at the beginning, what you said?
There are people that think that presuppositionalism is Calvinistic, and it is not inherently Calvinistic. There are free grace people, like people you talk to, Darth, Sam, Redefined Living. Yeah. He holds to free grace theology, but he's a presuppositionalist. So it's a conflation of issues. It's not exclusively something that Calvinists talk about.
Well, I agree with you, but what is true is that the the formalization of presuppositional apologetics in its 20th century iteration was within Reformed circles. And so that's why people may be making the mistake. Van Til himself would say that you couldn't, hold on one second. Oh, please. All right. So I understand people conflating a biblical presuppositional apologetic with Reformed theology, and that mistake is understandable given the history of it in the 20th century. You know, because its prime progenitor, Van Til, was a staunch Reformed theologian.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, maybe it might have been more popular in Reformed circles, but that doesn't mean it's exclusively a Calvinistic argument. It has more to do with logic.
I agree with you, but a staunch person of Reformed theology like Van Til would tell you that you would have a flawed presuppositional defense if you don't do it from a sufficiently Reformed foundation. I don't agree with that. I'm in agreement with you, but you have to understand that that's how Van Til expressed himself.
Well, that's fine, but he's wrong.
I agree with you. As much as I'm a fanboy of Van Til, I think he's wrong on that point. I think biblical presuppositional apologetics would have had far more reception had it not been so integrated with Reformed theology by Van Til. You see, when I read Van Til, he tightly integrates his Reformed theology with his biblical presuppositionalism.
Yeah.
Even though I disagree with that, I just simply ignore that when I'm reading. Okay? And I recognize the biblical truth of what he's saying, in spite of that he has tightly conjoined it with Reformed theology. That doesn't mean he's stupid. It just means he's adamant about this point, and I think he's wrong.
Well, Darth, that would be like a Mormon claiming, because we talk about the return of Christ, therefore it's something that would be exclusively Mormonism. That's the type of argumentation that people that argue that way about presuppositionalism, that's where they're going to. It doesn't logically follow that because Reformed people typically use this argument, therefore it's exclusively something that's Reformed.
Well, Van Til's position, and I disagree with him, but he articulates it very well, in spite of the fact that I disagree with him, is that unless we have the notion of God's ordination of all states of affairs, then we'll be granting a certain level of autonomy to man, and therefore that undermines the presuppositional argument. I don't believe that we're granting autonomy to man. God is the one who is granting people the capacity for agency, that they could choose otherwise. Right?
That's right.
Okay. So autonomy doesn't mean that one can choose something and choose something that's not foreordained by God. Autonomy means that the person is thinking, living, and breathing and acting not under the auspices of God as creator and sovereign Lord. It doesn't follow from that we have to accept that God ordains everything. Okay?
Right. That can't be the case, because then God would be the author of evil.
Right. But there are different notions of ordination. That's where it starts to get sticky. I fully believe that God foreknows certain choices that people make, that he would that they not, but they knew under certain conditions or counterfactuals that he would, and he permitted that to come to pass. Right. So I would be staking out a more of a Molinistic type of explanation, and to Calvinists that's anathema. They disagree with that. So
yeah, because they love their Gnosticism.
Well, I agree with you in terms of its origin, but they don't see or understand it that way. They don't understand the Gnostic origins of Augustinianism. By the way, have you read the Foundations of Augustinian Calvinism?
Yes, I love that book. I'm actually going to be reviewing it sometime soon.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal book by Ken Wilson. Although James
on my YouTube channel come up to me and claim that Ken Wilson was lying in his book and he was misrepresenting Augustine.
Oh, great chapter and we had what page number?
Exactly.
Yeah, you'll notice that, and I haven't read all of James White's criticism, but the stuff I am familiar with, it's lacking in substance when it comes to critiquing Ken Wilson. See, Ken Wilson is a bona fide, genuine Augustinian scholar, right? And that's what's so upsetting to them. He is only a handful of Augustinian scholars in the world who has read all of Augustine's work from their earliest works to the later works in chronological order.
Yep. I think actually Dr. Leighton Flowers had Dr. Wilson on his channel a couple times when he actually went over James White's critiques, and his critique was without substance. He avoided the issues and he didn't answer the objections that they were.
I like Leighton Flowers a lot, and I think he has a lot of good material, but there's a couple of people that he associates with that I just shake my head and going, what is he doing associating with those people? You know, it just, but then again, you know, he's coming from a Southern Baptist background, you know, so that's not to throw Leighton Flowers under the bus, because I do like his material.
Well, I mean, I love my Southern Baptist brothers and sisters. I currently go to a Southern Baptist church that teaches provisionism.
Well, the problem is the Southern Baptist Convention is corrupted. That doesn't mean that there's necessarily, you could have Southern Baptist churches a part of the convention that are vastly more conservative. You know, there's all different strains. There are conservative Southern Baptist churches. There are very liberal Southern Baptist churches. Okay. Yeah, I got to get a copy of Leighton Flowers' new book, Drawn by the Father.
Jesus.
Drawn by Jesus. I misspoke. Yeah. Do you have a copy of that book?
No, I have his other one though, The Potter's Promise. I haven't bought the
Yeah,
Drawn by
that too. Yeah. I have a lot of pro and con Calvinist works in the Calvinist folder in the Christmas present. Have you checked that out?
No, Darth, I don't know how to access it. You shared that with me a few years ago. I had it on the Google Drive, but I have no way to access it. I don't know how to get back to it now.
Okay, it's no longer on the Google Drive. It's on another one. Send me another DM and I'll send you the link. Okay, now just a word of advice. I have a 400 gigabyte download cap per month. So the drive is about 160 or 65 gigs, okay? So if you run into a bandwidth limitation and you don't want to wait until the renewal period, because it renews every 4 weeks, when that deadline is, I'll have to look that up. Right? I think it's in the middle of the month. But if you run into a bandwidth issue, it's more than worth it to you to spend the $20, okay, or whatever the fee is, to buy bandwidth so that you can acquire all of the research material. Okay, it's a lifetime supply of research material, Kevin.
I got it. All right.
So my recommendation to you is this: if you run into bandwidth problems, bite the bullet, buy extra bandwidth, so that you can access all of it. But I would recommend don't try to download all the resources all at once. Just do it folder by folder. That way, if any particular folder download fails in download, you know what you're missing and just re-download the whole folder. But if you try to download the whole thing, and it fails, you're not going to know what you're missing. Because
Right.
the failure of a subfolder, you could be missing half the books. And if half the books are in the folder's going to show up, but you're not going to know that you're missing half the books in the folder.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I will message you in a little while asking for the. I'll just say, can you share the Christmas present with me?
Yeah, yep. And it truly is. And it's a lifetime supply of resources.
Thanks, Darth. God bless.
You will thank me so much that you will name your next dog after me.
Okay.
And people are going to go, what's your dog's name? He's so cute. Darth. Why are you calling him Darth? It's a long story. Okay, I'm going to shut this down if we don't have any unbelievers who would like to challenge the Christian worldview.
they don't
Yeah.
call him on the carpet for essentially self-righteousness? I don't
No.
know. I don't know him really. I only see his name banted about. I don't even remember if I've ever heard him talk.
Would you like to?
Oh hell no.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've watched loads of videos. I was actually listening to one of those while I was reading the side chat there at JG's. I was listening to him talk to Smokey Saint about Van Til being a degenerate.
Van
Although
Til.
Smokey, yeah, he's the father of the transcendental argument for God. And
Okay,
then, yeah, go ahead.
I used to read a lot of Emerson and Thoreau. Is that the same transcendental stuff?
No.
Because those guys were pretty brilliant in their thinking.
This is the incorporation of the circular argument as part of a premise to conclude that you need that God is the basis for logic and reason. Logic and reason exist, therefore God. See, the problem is premise one assumes the conclusion in the premise. See, it's the circular argument. So anyway, we tried to talk to JG about it, but he can't grasp it. It's a weak argument. He thinks it's bulletproof, airtight,
Yeah. Okay.
There's better evidences, I'm sure. Anyway, it's the realm of philosophy and hardly the place for a man of the book. In my opinion.
I see.
Because they're mixing things. They're mixing philosophy and this transcendental argument for, and it's not just any God, it's the Christian God, and it's not just any Christian God, it's precisely the way that they see God. Can't be any other way. Yeah.
Did you ever spend any time reading Ralph Waldo Emerson?
A little bit.
Yeah, back in the 80s, I had all of his writings and was quite fond of him.
How's he put the premises and the conclusion in the private chat right there?
Oh, let's see. It says, God is necessary for logic and morality. Really? God is necessary for logic and morality. Number 2, people use logic and morality. Number 3, therefore God exists. This is what we were dealing with JG. God is necessary for logic and morality. Is that true? I don't know.
Do you see the problem with that, though, Ace?
I don't even know what it means.
So this is an argument that attempts to prove the existence of God.
Oh?
By attaching it to the existence of logic and morality.
So 2 + 2 = 4, therefore there is God.
Yeah, but
sure. But
the problem, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You got this.
A is A, therefore there is God.
Well, see how in the premise number 1, we have to assume that God is already in existence in order for it to be necessary for logic and morality, but the whole point of this argument is to prove that God exists.
So you're assuming the conclusion, which is that God exists, in the supporting premise,
right,
that God is necessary for logic and morality. So you're already pre-assuming the God's existence. So the conclusion. That's why it's circular.
I see.
Because you're using the conclusion to support the conclusion.
And when we pointed out it was circular, JG went on to talk about how circular arguments aren't always bad. And so, because we use logic to figure out logic and to examine logic, then logic itself is circular. And so we should just accept that some things are circular, which made no sense to me.
Howdy, howdy.
What
Well,
I like that greeting. I named one of my cats Ello so that I could say hello, Ello.
Has anyone ever named their dog Syndrome?
Syndrome.
No,
No.
but I'm
'Cause if
sure that's
you're-
fun.
Yeah, because if your dog, well, if it's an aggressive dog, you're
You're
gonna
saying
end up having
Down
to say
syndrome.
Down syndrome.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Now I
Fun
regret
visits,
naming
yeah.
my dogs what I named them. Doggone it, I didn't think of that. Is it too late to change their names? No. Oh, we're just in here doing something other than hanging out in JG side chat.
Hmm.
Oh, this is like a refuge.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Sure. How you doing? How was your Pajot talk?
I thought it was fun. I don't know. You tell me. I mean, I've gotten different responses. It was cool. A little unfulfilling, but
I haven't. I only saw a little bit of like a couple clips because we just got back from like a 2-week road trip, so I haven't seen much of it.
So Twitter Spaces is audio only, right? I don't get to. I just got my camera set up. Okay.
You're on my channel, so you can clip this and do whatever.
Okay. Is this being recorded or?
Yeah, we're live on YouTube and over here on Twitter.
Man, I'm pretty clueless. So
okay.
I reached out to you, Jake, because I had it had to be like 50, 60, something, like a lot of people saying, hey, you got to talk to Jay Dyer.
Okay.
And so, because my conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, the purpose of that conversation, the reason I set up the call, the reason he spoke to me, is because I wanted to ask him questions about the work he does with symbolism. That's his thing.
Uh-huh.
And then we get into the call, and he mentions Christianity, and I couldn't help myself. And I was like, do you really believe in that? Can I ask you about your views? Can I push you on this a bit? And I said, Jonathan, I know this is not something that we said we would discuss, but here we are. Like, can I go into this? And he said, yeah, go for it, for sure. And so that's how we got into that conversation.
And you, what? I haven't had a chance to look at your channel. What do you focus on mainly? What's your topics?
Yeah. So basically the question I asked him that I want to ask you is, I agree with you that there's a lot of value to be gained in practicing religion. I think we live in a world where it's difficult to create a system of morality and ethics outside of religion, and there's a lot of value to religion, okay? I think people should practice what they want to practice. That being said, I still think it's appropriate to say, well, hold on a minute, did the stories of the Bible actually happen? But again, I want to make it extremely clear to the listeners, I'm not saying this is so silly, you shouldn't practice religion. I'm saying there's value to religion, and it's a good question to ask, how do you know the stories happened? And I think you can be someone who practices religion or appreciates religion, but doesn't believe in the Bible word for word. So really my question is just, how do you know that the Bible, like the stories of the Bible actually happened? Mm-hmm. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I tend to argue the transcendental argument for God's existence. And so it's kind of like, it's a logical argument that's prior to logic at all, or the doing of logic, or any knowledge claims at all, because it deals with the preconditions of knowledge. So it's kind of like, I would agree with you that we're not going to settle the issue of like what things are possible or not possible apart from what types of things we think are possible within our worldviews or our paradigms. So ultimately for me, it's kind of a worldview question where we end up saying, well, the only way that I know what's possible is based on some kind of metaphysical assumption from the outset. And in order to go about that, we end up having to do worldview or transcendental argumentation. So that's kind of debating things at a fundamental level. And the challenge is this, that if the Christian God does not exist, then knowledge, metaphysics, and ethics becomes impossible to justify or make sense of. So I usually flip this argument and say that the way that I know is that without that God existing, knowledge in terms of justified true belief wouldn't really even be possible. And so God becomes, for me, in my argument, the necessary grounding for the possibility of knowledge, logic, ethics at all. That's the transcendental argument, and I think it's the strongest one.
By the way, I want to, the other thing, like, I feel like I could have done better in my conversation with Jonathan Peugeot is, like, I want to concede to as many points as I possibly can, because that way I don't detract. I really have one singular point, and I don't want it to get lost. And I feel like with religious debate and conversation, the arguments often get tangled up because there's so many layers of understanding that we can get to with these conversations. So let me concede as much as I can. You're making, so God exists, right? I have no problem with that. Why not? So God is, let's say God is real, and and that explains, I think, whatever you were saying about like the ethics or something. So again, let me ask the question: how do you know that the stories of the Bible actually happened?
Because of the transcendental argument. That's where I start from.
So I don't know if I followed the argument, but I think what your argument is saying is like, because of some things that we see in the world, like, I don't know, like patterns or something, that therefore the Bible, I'm not following. Like, what's the argument?
So the form of the argument is X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X. The argument in terms of how I explicate it is that if God didn't exist, then there would be no way to have justified true belief. That is, a way to ground our knowledge in terms of epistemology. And so because we do have knowledge, or we appear to, exchange information and have conversations, and we use language and meaning and numbers and math and all that, then knowledge appears to exist. And so therefore, in order for knowledge to even be possible, requires some kind of ultimate absolute, some kind of ultimate principle, and namely that is the Christian God. So the Christian God does the work of grounding as a kind of, in theology is called divine conceptualism. So meaning, language, all these things are only possible in the sense of justifying their existence and their.
Jay, maybe I'm fucking stupid. I'm not understanding this at all, man. Let me try to read it back to you, and then you. So the essence of what you're saying is like, look, you're not trying to prove the Bible stories being true from first principles, saying, hey, Jake, look, here's the evidence, here's how I know it's true. What you're doing is the reverse, which I think is a reasonable approach to take, right? To say, like, I want to think of an analogy. Like, if I can't prove something, like if I find a dead person with a bullet hole in their head and I can't find the gun, I could infer like, hey, this person probably got shot in the head because now there's a bullet hole in their head, right? So it's possible for us to infer causal relationships.
No,
in the reverse.
Sorry. So I don't fault you for.
But I really, like, I don't know if it's because I haven't slept enough. Like, so you're saying, can you say your argument in like one sentence? Like, so you think the essence of what you're saying is you think the stories of the Bible happened because of some way that they're manifesting themselves in reality. I'm just not clear what you're really saying. Like,
yeah, I mean, right. So again, it's a specific type of logical argument called the transcendental argument for God's existence, right?
Yes.
And it posits that before you can even do the type of questioning that you're asking about what's possible in terms of miracles or Bible stories or whatever, that there are prior questions that we all have and assumptions about what's possible that have to be debated and discussed first. So in your worldview, you would, as a skeptic or an atheist or whatever your position is, agnostic, you would assume that, it just doesn't seem like those things are possible. So at the outset, you and I have different accounts of what things are and aren't possible, metaphysically speaking. So the point there is just to say that
I don't think we do at all. If I told you, hey man, like my grandma rose from the dead today, you'd be like, nah, man, no, she didn't. Like, let me see evidence of that. I would bet that you and I, Jay, have the same understanding of what generally is metaphysically possible.
Well, no, but because my ultimate governing commitment is the Christian paradigm, yours is not. So no, we have fundamentally different accounts of what things are and are not possible.
Would you believe me if I told you right now my grandmother rose from the dead today?
No, I would not.
Why not?
Because it's very unlikely.
Right, because why? Because it violates what you know about physics, right?
No, it's just it wouldn't be likely just given a common sense account of what things typically occur. But
exactly. So you take your words. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
So the whole argument, I think you've missed the entire argument. The argument is not settled by particular claims about this or that event in our lives. It's a question of paradigms as a whole. And you're reading everything, all of the evidence that comes into your brain or whatever is read through your worldview, through your paradigm. And so you say your assumption is that certain things are not possible or very, very unlikely. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you can give an account for these things as a whole. So do you believe that there's objective truth or that knowledge is possible?
You'd have to define those terms. And by the way, I don't want to, I'm not trying to, I don't want to like outright try to refute what you're saying or try to kind of push you to a corner. I really am genuinely trying to understand.
Right. So I mean, we've heard skeptical claims a lot, and I don't have a problem with you bringing forward sort of the skeptical claim or an argument. But the point is that this is a much deeper issue than whether or not it's possible for something out of the ordinary to happen. So let's say that your grandmother did appear to, come back or wake up out of the coffin or something like that. I mean, you would probably assume that even if that occurred, it wasn't a miracle. It was some sort of weird phenomena that we haven't studied or understood yet, or science hasn't given us an answer yet, right? So even if someone rose from the dead, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the supernatural is true, even in your worldview, right?
No, I mean, if someone rose from the dead, I would be a believer, man. I would say, wow, that's pretty good evidence that something's going on here. I would. In that instant, I would try to find a religious.
Well, don't you think that? So there's a lot of claims of this in the world, right? And most skeptics.
Is my mic okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear.
It's good because I got this this Shure microphone. I don't know if it's coming. The audio on Twitter Spaces doesn't really give me an option to.
You sound great to me. So.
Do I?
You sound great, yeah.
Oh, thanks, man. You should see. Okay. So anyway, so you were saying.
No, I mean, there are miracle claims all the time in the world, and most people do not accept them. They most of the time they will say, well, there's probably another explanation for that. And you don't think in the case of your grandmother you would look for another explanation?
Yeah, so if I saw it, then I would say, wow, that's pretty remarkable. If I told you my grandmother rose from the dead, hopefully you would not believe me. You would say, dude, I don't believe you. That sounds pretty unlikely.
Well, that's precisely why this issue can't be solved on what people's claims are, and it's so that's why it goes to the paradigm level. That's the whole point of the transcendental argument.
So let's then, I was saying I don't understand the transcendental argument. Let's drill into the transcendental argument. So I'm going to say what I understand about it, and then maybe you can elaborate a bit, and we can have a substantive conversation about this argument itself. So the transcendental argument, as I understand from you, is that we understand the divinity of the Bible or of Christianity based on the causes of that source. So based on what we're seeing.
It's not the causal argument.
We're seeing in reality. So let's just dig into that. So what is it about the world?
Right. So the transcendental argument is prior to the teleological argument. It's prior to the causal argument. It's before all of those, because it's an argument about the possibility of arguing at all. So it's a meta level argument. Are you familiar with meta level argumentation?
I just think it's. I guess.
Well, maybe you need to understand it first, because I'm not trying to be rude, but let's understand it first. So, what is your worldview first, by the way? Agnostic?
What is my worldview? I don't know. You know what? I actually, on principle, I'm going to stay away from any of those terms because I don't think they're helpful in this context. In fact, I think they detract from the point. I think a big problem with these religious arguments is you have people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson who, because of their own ego primarily, are kind of rambling and trying to intertwine these complex terms. I'm going to use as simple terms as possible and as few words as possible to make my points, because I think that is at the crux of a powerful argument. And I can very concisely describe how I understand reality without the use of any of these more complex theories, right? So what do I believe? I believe we live on planet Earth, and it's round and it orbits the sun. I believe that we have an intact system for discerning truth about history.
And what would that be?
Yeah, so hold on. So I believe we have an intact system for discerning truth about, generally speaking, about science and history. And we sometimes get it wrong. Sometimes we fuck it up, and sometimes details are wrong. But you and I both agree, I don't even have to ask this, you and I both agree that largely speaking, our global societal understanding of history is true, right? Neither you.
No, I have no idea what that even means. That's just appeals to generalities that I don't even know what that means.
I'll be very specific. Both you and I agree that claims of the fact that the Mayans had a thriving civilization, that there was a Roman Empire that rose and fell, that the Mongolian Empire, that Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean, all of these are historical accounts that we have created as a society and understood. And I'm going to make the bet, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that you believe these things, that you believe George Washington was the first president, that you believe Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean. Am I correct or am I incorrect?
Yeah, I don't have any significant reasons to doubt those things.
So let me respond to that. So the reason you're not doubting those things is because, like myself, you agree that through the methods that as a society, as a world, we've discovered that the Egyptians had pyramids and the Mayans had a civilization and Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean. We trust those things because we know that we have a great system for understanding historical fact. It's not a perfect system.
Now,
pretty good.
Now we come to the problem here.
So do you or don't you? So here's the question: do you or don't you believe that we have a really good system?
No. So you're confusing. So it would help to take an epistemology class, not being a rude person by saying that, but you can assert the things that are commonly held, but that doesn't tell you that you have the right theory of epistemology or the right theory of knowledge. That's another type of question. So you're confusing the pragmatic account of what most of us believe or what we think by common sense, which is not necessarily wrong, but none of that can tell you whether you have the right theory of knowledge.
But I'm asking a very simple question. Do you believe?
No.
So like, I'll ask you in 8 words.
You can ask that question, but it's ignoring what I'm raising, which is epistemology and your theory of knowledge. So you can't just keep appealing to to consensus, because at the level of epistemic theory, that's a fallacy.
Okay, so I'll grant all that. So here's my question, and it's a yes or no question. And do you, Jay Dyer, think that we meaning, America, society, the world, whatever, do we have a system for discerning historical truth that works? Do we have a system that works?
It works for certain things, but it can't tell you the right theory of epistemology. That's the point.
I feel like invoking these terms is
Okay, so in other words, you don't want to go into philosophy because that would be the problem.
I want to go into philosophy, but I want you to answer my question. Do you think we have a system?
I am answering your question, but it's such a low tier type of question that you're not familiar with what epistemic theory is. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
What?
Do I know
What is it? What is your theory of epistemology?
Epistemology is.
Are you Googling it right now?
As the notion of truth in terms of epistemic notions.
Are you? Did you Google it to read it?
I Googled it because I don't.
Yeah. Right. So you're not even aware of what the issues are. The question was, what is your theory of knowledge? Not do people believe things through common sense and consensus. Do you understand that consensus is a fallacy?
Consensus is a fallacy. Sure. Yeah. That can be a fallacy if everyone just believes one thing.
Okay. So so your epistemic theory was grounded on a fallacy because you said, well, what we know is what we all know, what America and the world has determined.
I'm asking you a question. Do you think that
That's a tu quoque.
What's that? I don't know what these are.
So you don't know what these. So why are you trying to debate these things? If you don't know the basic fallacies.
And you're pushing back me by asking other questions. So
No. The question was about epistemology, and you're asking me another question, which is a tu quoque.
So I apologize if I ignored your question. So what? Your question that I heard was you're questioning me about whether
I want to know your theory of knowledge because you said we know. In fact, you said it twice. We know that this is the right approach to how we have knowledge of history. And I'm saying that is not adequate and doesn't work for grounding your epistemology. That's another type of question that you can't just appeal to consensus.
Yeah. So I don't know that. So let me try to answer your question, Jay.
Have you had a basic philosophy class? I'm not trying to be rude to you, but I can tell that you haven't.
I have.
You have, but you didn't know what epistemology was.
I don't know the definition as you're using.
Okay, but you would learn that if you had a philosophy class.
I have a degree in this. I just haven't. I just don't think it's relevant to the specific question.
Oh, so epistemology is not relevant to the question of debate. Okay.
No, sorry. So it's been a while. So the theory of knowledge. Okay. So now I remember what it is. Gotcha. So now I remember what I learned in undergrad about epistemology. I'm with you. It's an ontology, and there's, all these terms. I just look. To be honest, I don't think.
Right. So you're going to go back to appealing to avoiding the question, right? You're going to go back to appealing to your basic question.
What's your question? Your question is, what is epistemology? Is that your question?
Wow. No. You said that we have a basic way for discerning truth, and we know. You said it twice. We know, right? And I said, how do you know that that's the right criteria for determining truth? That that's the right epistemic criteria?
How do I know? But I don't think you want to be asking that question. And the reason I don't think you want to be asking that question is because if that's a sincere question, then you're calling into question everything we know about reality.
You're not even aware of basic philosophy. So
Okay.
if you're going to have a debate, you need to know the basic terms. Mimocrity. Epistemology, the study of epistles, like that girl said. Unmute, dude.
Okay.
Sure.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for letting me back in. By the way, I didn't think you were being mean. I think we might have been talking past each other. I mean, I think I should have framed the question like this. Like, I have a particular question, and this question, in my view, doesn't require us to define and interrogate and kind of debate deeper philosophical definitions.
But our response is that it does.
Okay. So then I guess I have been ineffective and I have failed at articulating my question in such a way that has gotten a response from you. So I want to try again. And again, my goal is just to get a response. So I want to grant you everything that you want to be granted. I want to accept the definitions as you have stated them for every philosophical term that you might have, and any claim of my own ignorance.
So I think that the impasse that we're having is that you think that the questions that I'm asking or the things that I'm saying to you aren't addressing what your challenge is. And my response is that the challenge is more fundamental than the question that you're asking.
The challenge is more fundamental.
Right.
I'm just.
My challenge to you is more fundamental. My response is more fundamental than the level of discourse or dispute that you have about historical events and historical claims.
Right, and so then if I'm, and by the way, it's possible that the way I'm framing this question is just not acceptable. In which case, I tried and I can chalk up my losses. But I guess here's another question. Let's say you're going for a walk one day, and a 5-year-old walks up to you and he says, "Hey, you're Jay Dyer," and you're like, "Yeah." And the 5-year-old boy is like, "Hey, Jay Dyer, I have a question for you. Do we as a society have a way of ascertaining historical truth? Yes or no?" What would you say to that 5-year-old?
Again, if you restate this, it's ignoring the question that we're asking, which is that you're assuming a whole bunch of things that have not been demonstrated yet. Because the way that the question...
I'm a 5-year-old, I'm asking a question.
No, this doesn't work. Again, you don't understand why this doesn't work. But I mean, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but like, there's a reason why philosophy progresses in the direction that it does, and certain things happen the way that they do. It's not something that's divorced from life and reality.
Yeah.
And so
I'll do whatever it takes, man. I will do whatever it takes to get you to answer my question. Like, what do I have to do? What do I have to answer?
I'm not really even understanding.
How do I get you to answer
his question is, let me see if I restate it. The question is that if we have a reliable way to go about...
Do we have a reliable way? That's my question.
Again, you don't understand the question, the response. Because it's a paradigm level question, you can't just respond with the way that many people operate as if that addresses the paradigm level question. Does that make sense or no?
I'll answer really easy.
Be mean to me. Tell me what I need to do. I will do anything, man.
Well, I'll tell
whatever
you.
I need to do. Just answer my question. How do I get you? What can I say to get you to answer my question? I'll answer more definitions. Like, what do I do?
I'll answer it.
Yeah.
People do have a reliable way. I argue this in my paper. At a first order, people can know things, and there's methodologies, there's normative principles. The difference is that person at the first order in an autonomous way doesn't know that. They don't know if it's reliable.
Okay.
So that's why it pushes up to a second order question is only Orthodox paradigm can actually, from a privileged epistemic point of view, say, yeah, that's a reliable historical mode. That child can know that. That's correct. That person knows. So apart from the Orthodox paradigm, people don't know that they have a reliable method. Does that make sense? So
Father Ananias, and by the way, I'd love to speak with you sometime. A lot of my viewers so I did this, what became a debate. It was an accidental impromptu debate with Jonathan Peugeot, during which I was very apologetic. I really didn't want to progress it, but we did, and I thought it was interesting. So a lot of my guests, my viewers of that debate wanted me to talk to both you, Jay Dyer, and you, Father Ananias. So if we can, I'm going to reach out to you. Hope we can connect. So Father Ananias, my question is, do you, Father Ananias, believe that we as a society have an accurate or effective way for discerning or ascertaining historical truth?
Yes, I absolutely do believe.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Okay, my next question is, given that you do believe that we as a society have a way of ascertaining historical truth, and by the way, one of the amazing products of that ability to discern truth is, history textbooks, okay? So here's my question to Father Ananias. Because you believe in the system that we have for ascertaining historical truth, which has resulted in products like history textbooks, my question to you is, why are the stories of the Bible not in history textbooks?
Why are they not in the history textbooks?
Yes, that's my question.
When do you think the first textbook was?
Do you really want to? So let me ask you, the first textbook was after a lot of history that's recorded in the textbooks, right? We were able
The
to
first
figure out-
textbook is after the history in the textbooks.
Oh,
So,
yeah, big time. Do you think that the Mayan civilization had history textbooks?
Dude, come on. I asked you a question. When were the first textbooks?
When were the first textbooks? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
So wait a minute. Your question is premised on that history textbooks should and ought to have the biblical stories in them if they're going to be reliable. But you don't know when the first textbooks were written.
It depends what you mean by textbooks. So
What do you mean by textbook? This is your argument, dude.
You have a really interesting way of
Okay, here we go. So you have a low tier. You have it's like a kindergarten level epistemology, and when we reply with the nuance that's necessary for these questions, you act
You're
like
asking
we're
me a
short.
question. I'm saying I don't know, and you're saying that your argument's bullshit.
I'll respond.
Well, you ought to know if that's what your argument's based on.
By the way,
it's not. It's not. It isn't. It's irrelevant when the first history
Okay,
textbook.
so we ought to go by history textbooks. Who cares when they and where they come from? Why don't they have the Bible?
The first history textbook was in 1482. There's your
Did you
answer.
just Google that, like you Googled it earlier?
This isn't.
So you debate with Google.
And what this has to do with the reliability of the scriptures, which themselves are historical accounts. I could answer, be like, I don't know. I could speculate, and I could give you answers. Why aren't they recorded in history books?
Please,
But it has nothing.
This has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. Exactly.
Whether it's true or false or reliable.
I'm asking, why is it on the history textbook? That's what I'm asking.
But that's irrelevant to whether it's true or false. So again, you don't.
Actually, I'm not going to answer it. I can't, and I'm not going to, because I think it's going to drive you to a more important point. I'll say I don't know. How about that?
I don't know this. I want to get into something, Father Ananias, and
There's lots of things we don't know, but do you see how that then leads to that question? But it's irrelevant whether that's a reliable method.
But you already agreed it's a reliable method because I asked you, do you believe we have a method?
Yeah, but we want to know.
Yeah, because of historical text.
Yeah, we want to know though, like why you think it's a reliable method, because your argument is assuming that, right?
Well, Father Ananias already said it is. So
No. I want to know why you think it is.
And you do too, by the way.
I want to know why you think it is.
For the same reasons that you do. That's why I do.
No, my reasons are ultimately theistic. I want to know why you think that's a reliable method. What's the criteria that we're supposed to go by here?
So the criteria, and this is a longer, more complicated answer, but the bigger point is that we have two options, all of us on this call. We either believe that, the earth is round, that science is real, and that the Roman
so
Empire,
appeals to irrelevance. That has nothing to do with it.
I can tell you the system of methods that were used to determine, for example, that the Roman Empire existed.
So let's go back to the point that we had when you were first on, which is that you don't understand the question that's being asked to you when you posit that. So you assert that as your method and your criteria, and then I ask you why we ought to think that that's the correct criteria, and you had, and the last time that you came on. The last time you came on, you didn't want to answer that. You had to look it up.
I'm the guest. I'm the one asking the question.
No, it doesn't work like that. No, it's a debate. A debate's back and forth. So you don't get to set the parameters.
Jay, if I ask a question and you defer it by saying, well, when were the history books written? And that's not part of my argument. And then I tell
It
you.
is. Your argument assumes that we're supposed to somehow know that historical books are reliable, and you couldn't even tell me when history textbooks go. Like, why are we supposed to follow a textbook?
You're asking anecdotal questions.
They're not anecdotal. They're based on your. I'm questioning your
assumptions.
assumptions, which you haven't questioned. That's what
It's not an
epistemology
assumption.
does.
So first of all, I gave you the answer for 1482.
No, you didn't.
It's totally irrelevant.
You don't understand. Do you understand what an arbitrary ad hoc argument is? The fact that
Yes,
something.
that's what you're making continuously. You're making.
I'm making
arbitrary
it.
ad
So
hoc
asking you questions is arbitrary and ad hoc.
Yes, correct. Asking a question about the date of a history textbook when it's irrelevant to the point I'm making is an ad hoc. You're deviating from the point. It's a form of hubris, frankly. Father Ananias was able to answer it, and to answer your question, the way
No, we
know
just simply
history-
said that it's all irrelevant, and I'm only bringing up the history of when they started as to point out that if history textbooks,
I answered your question.
if history, so look, if history textbooks, again, if history textbooks come from the 1400s, why would we expect that they would record things that are 6,000 years old?
Because they did. They recorded things like the Mayan civilization, the Roman Empire, which were years and years old.
Again,
They
but
also-
none of this has anything to do with whether it's true or false. That's the stupidity of this whole debate, is that you don't understand the epistemic issue
Father
here.
Ananias already said that he agrees we have an accepted method.
But
for
that doesn't
discerning-
tell us about what we ought to believe. So the fact that
Take it
people,
up with him because he disagrees with
I don't
you.
care what, listen, the fact
Don't
that,
disagree. Jay's right on this.
yeah, the fact that people
Pointing out
agree,
is you have no justification
Yeah.
for what's an accepted method. We do, and this is why it goes into a presuppositional and transcendental argument for the existence of God, which in part is part of the grounding that we know that these are historically accurate, because the impossibility of the contrary to establish outside the worldview of orthodoxy in the scriptures on the entirety to make any claims whatsoever. So I can say it because orthodoxy provides the only epistemically privileged position. Nobody else can do that. So you can't arbitrarily come in and be like, well, I don't accept this and I don't. Those are all knowledge claims.
you don't understand the difference between first order and second order claims either, which is the whole point of why we're having to go over this again and again.
Yeah, look, I think I'm gonna get muted soon, so I don't want to dictate.
Look, all you have to look, just tell me. So you've made a bunch of arguments about why we ought to follow the historical method that you're talking about. Why ought we do that? What's your epistemic criteria for that?
Epistemic. Here we go again. Like this is. A
Yeah, so you don't like normal philosophy terms. Do you understand if you're going to go debate people publicly, maybe you should know what these words mean? Why wouldn't you do that?
If you're making knowledge claims, you're in the category of epistemology. So you can't just say, well, I don't like this and I don't want to do it.
I'm making, but I actually think that you're subverting my question.
So you can't tell me why I ought to believe your position.
I can tell you why I ought to believe my position. So, by the way, for those listening,
No, don't change it. Tell me why we ought to believe your position.
Okay, so let me express what my position is because I don't think it's.
No, we don't. We've heard it 5 times, dude. Why ought we believe your historical account, your historical method?
Because every single person, including yourself, believes that we have a way of ascertaining historical truth.
That's just
why,
so that doesn't tell me that I ought to believe it. Even if everybody in the world does accept it, that doesn't tell me that I ought to believe it. That's a fallacy.
I'm making a point about I'm making a point about how do we live our lives. Like, what's the
None of those are all non sequiturs. The fact, I mean, that's relativistic.
Fine. You want data, historical records, 5 things: historical records, archaeological evidence, coinage, literature, and
Those are all assertions of facts, and I asked why we ought to believe that method.
Because it has been proven time and again to be
Proven by who?
stand the test of time.
That's a circle.
So
you're melting down because you haven't understood basic epistemic questions. Do you understand? Do you understand that I would help you? You would be a better debater if you understood basic epistemic questions. And you're melting down because you don't even understand it. You're just floundering.
You're not responding to my
What's the is-ought distinction?
You're debating yourself.
What's the is-ought
You're not
distinction?
debating me. You're debating yourself. I'm asking a question. You're not answering
What's
my
the is-ought distinction?
Again, you're debating.
So you don't know
yourself.
basic philosophy. You said you had a philosophy
Is-ought
class.
but you are bringing my question into your
No.
paradigm.
Again, no, we're not. I'm asking your account of why I ought to believe it, and you haven't given me a good
By
argument.
the way, this is a patronizing way of talking.
Oh, here we go. Now here comes the ad hominems and the complaints and the whining. You're not a victim. You came on here to debate. Tell me why I ought to believe your position. What's the difference between is ought?
So is what is in reality. Ought
Right.
is more of a statement about what we should do.
Okay, why ought I believe your position? Correct.
Why ought you should believe my position? There's many reasons. We have found that using historical records, archaeological evidence.
We have found. Who? That's a universal claim. That's just an assertion.
Every historian
Every
in the world.
historian. Universal claim. Are you serious or are you trolling? Come on.
No, it's a fact.
It's a fact. So I can just assert. Do you understand that in a debate how bad that is? What you just said, how dumb that is?
It's a fact. It's a fact. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Okay, so you can just assert things in a debate as facts and universal claims.
It is a fact. It's a fact. Like, there are certain claims that are facts, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Your claim wasn't even a fact. It's dumb. You said all historians assert your position.
No. I'm telling you facts. Like, I don't know what else to say.
You just melted down. The whole chat's laughing at you, dude. You realize that?
Wait, let them laugh at me. It's a fact.
All right, you're a troll. This is ridiculous.
Then mute me. And don't.
Goodbye. Gladly. We now know that all the facts of all the historians assert my positions everywhere in the world. They say what I say, and it's just a fact. It is the case that it's a fact, and I know that because it's a fact. Literally, T-Jump. Like, actually, T-Jump's better than that guy. I will give T-Jump better.
Well, it's the same thing over and over again that somebody tells us a story and they attach the words facts, proven, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you just say it's a fact. You just say it's a fact.
We're not asking what you believe is a fact. We're asking the justification for that. So that why ought we to believe that?
Yeah,
so
but we all believe this.
Would have normative.
This is so stupid.
Would be binding upon us. Yeah, I ought to believe
That guy's a liar too. He says that he's studied philosophy. He's had philosophy classes. Every single basic. I'm not being mean, but I don't think that it's not appropriate to lie and present yourself publicly as something that you're not. And if you claim that you're a philosopher, you've studied philosophy and had philosophy classes, as he claimed when he was first on, and you don't know any of the basic terms that come up in philosophy, people think that we're being mean. I'm being mean to people. No, you're being a fraud because you're presenting yourself as a philosopher and a student of these. He said he'd had classes on these things. No, he hadn't. He didn't know one single philosophical term that we mentioned in that whole time. So I don't think he's had any philosophy classes. And people love to get on and just present themselves as something that they're not. He says, I need to debate you because I debated Pajot. And this guy's just wanting attention. He's wanting to build up his channel. He invited Pajot on and then starts a debate with Pajot and acts like he didn't want to have a debate, but it happened. He says, you need to debate me in the DMs. We need to have this debate. Well, I said, you can come on a live stream. I'm not putting you up as a formal debate opponent when you have about 300 subscribers. No, I'm sorry. I don't owe you these things. And so when he comes on claiming that he's studied philosophy, he's had this training, and then he hasn't had any at all, that's fraudulent. So yeah, somebody said he got a University of Phoenix philosophy degree. So again, I'm not even, Father Deacon is way more studied in epistemology than me. But I've had enough philosophy to immediately tell when somebody's lying. And it only works really for low tier people. Like, that's the only way that the T-Jump can get an audience, is by a bunch of low tier Reddit people who are duped into his constant appeals to really simple common sense things. Look, all I'm asking for is a simple answer to a question. Look, if you wouldn't believe that my grandmother rose from the dead, why should I believe Jesus rose from the dead? And then when we point out that these are ultimately paradigm level questions, no, I don't want to go to all that. Don't give me all that. Well, what's epistemology? And then you guys heard him Googling it.